Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Bulma glared at the newcomer, irked by the delay this would cause in getting the answers she wanted. The boy, who looked to be about a year younger than her, was slightly shorter than her with tall, flame-like black hair that defied gravity. For someone so young, she had to admit that his body was pretty toned. No, not toned. Built was the word for it. If it weren't for the scowl on his face, she would have said he had potential to grow up to be a very handsome guy. These thoughts, however, were not on her mind when she opened her mouth to respond to what he had just said. Well, someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, she snapped, staring down her nose at the rude little boy. You know, you really shouldn't swear like that in front of kids. She conveniently ignored the fact that she hadn't exactly been watching her language, either. Besides, a little mild cussing was one thing. What this boy had said went a little beyond mild. I am the Saiyajin no Uji, so I can say whatever the hell I want to, bitch. Vegeta shot back. Their eyes met, and you could almost see sparks flying between them as the tension mounted. And speaking of bed, did you just crawl out of it? Or is that how you always look? Because that's the only explanation I can think of for why you're so damn ugly. Actually, the girl wasn't that bad looking, if you discounted the silly blue hair she sported, but he wasn't about to say that. The girl bared her teeth in a silent snarl and clenched her fists in an effort to control herself. I spent an hour and a half getting ready this morning, and he has the gall to suggest I'm ugly. Kuzatari, I'll have you know that I'm considered extremely pretty for my age. You jerk. Really? Vegeta smirked. Then I'd hate to see what the rest of the females on this planet look like, although it's hard to imagine anyone uglier than you. You're one to talk. What'd you do to yourself to get that hair? Stick a fork in an electrical outlet. That would also explain the brain damage you've obviously suffered. Vegeta reached up and touched a lock of his hair. A defensive look on his face. This is the hairstyle all of the men of the royal bloodline of Vegeta-sei bear, he said disdainfully. And what about you? What did you do to your hair to get it to be such an unnatural color? Did you dye it like that, or, he paused, smiling slyly, is it really a wig? With a shriek of outrage, Bulma's hand slashed through the air towards the prince's face, only to stop in mid-swing as the boy lazily reached up and grabbed her wrist. He smirked dangerously as she struggled futilely against his iron grip. Let me go, you bastard. Why should I? Vegeta purred, his smirk broadening even further. You're the one who tried to hit me, after all. On Vegeta-sei, I could have you killed for that. Bakalana. He tightened his grip until Bulma let out a small whimper of pain. Vegeta. Trunks snapped, deciding this had gone far enough. Better put a stop to this before someone got hurt, namely his mother. Let Bulma go. Right. Now. He raised his ki, threateningly, letting his chibi father know in no uncertain terms that he meant business. He could almost have sworn that the young prince pouted as he let the girl's hand go. Trunks shook it off as only his imagination. Fine, the 10-year-old boy growled, but I will not be so lenient the next time she dares to raise a hand against the prince of all Saiyajins. Folding his arms against his chest, he leaned back against the wall and gave Bulma a death glare, which was met by an equally heated glare from Bulma as she rubbed her sore wrist. Kono Yaro, she muttered under her breath. Vegeta only smirked. Clenching his fist tightly, the lavender-haired boy narrowed his eyes. Vegeta, you are not allowed to kill or maim anyone on this planet unless they actually pose a threat. Got it? Vegeta's gaze shifted from Bulma to his future son, growling faintly. However, upon seeing the deadly serious expression in the boy's crystal ice blue eyes, he grimaced and bobbed his head once. More in acknowledgement of the threat than any real submission. Guessing that this was as good as he was going to get, Trunks sighed and turned to Bulma. Bulma, may I have the hair dye, please? Sure, kid, she said, shooting a final glare at Vegeta. At least someone has some manners. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out 2 bottles of hair dye. Okay, this one is the black dye, and this one is brown. It has to set in the hair for 5 minutes before it can be rinsed out, but that's as complicated as it gets. Rigato, Bulma, Trunks said, giving his future mother a smile as he took the dye and gave it to Goku. Goku, do you want to go give this to your dad? Goku nodded enthusiastically and dashed off with the dye, eager to do something that would make his father happy. Goten started to follow after the Saiyan boy, but Trunks stopped him, shaking his head. Let Goku do it, Goten. I need your help here. The younger Demisaiyan glanced at Bulma and Vegeta, then nodded to his best friend. There was no need to specify what Trunks needed help with. Okay, Trunks. Well then, back to business, the human girl stated firmly, eyeing the two chibis in front of her. I believe one of you still owes me an explanation, and, she added, her brain catching up to her now that it wasn't clouded in fury. What's up with all this talk of Saiyans and a planet Vegeta? There's really no way to break this to her gently, Trunks mused silently. Well, here goes. He pulled his tail out from behind him, where it had been hidden from Bulma's view, then pointed at Vegeta's tail, which she had formerly mistaken as a furry brown belt. Saiyans are another race from the planet Vegeta. The biggest difference between a Saiyan and a human is that Saiyans have tails like these. Bulma's eyes widened as she caught sight of the tails on all three boys in the room. Knowing exactly what was coming, Trunks and Goten covered their sensitive ears. Unfortunately for Vegeta, he did not. What the hell? In another part of the house, Krillin, Master Rosie, and Raditz shot up out of bed in alarm as an ear-piercing shriek shook the house to its foundation. Recognizing the owner of the voice, Krillin and Master Rosie grumbled in annoyance and sank back down onto their futons. Raditz frowned at them in confusion. Aren't you gonna go find out what that was? Nope, the old turtle hermit muttered. I know who that was, and she's always screaming about one thing or another. Let's not get too close to her when she's yelling at someone else, or when she's yelling, period. Unless, of course, you want to permanently damage your hearing. Who is it? A bewildered Raditz asked. He didn't recall meeting any females besides lunch, and she didn't sound anything like the banshee who had just screeched loud enough to be heard halfway across the world. It's just Bulma, Krillin yawned, burying his head under his pillow. If she's not yelling at you, it's better if you just ignore her. Raditz shook his head and pulled on his clothes. Whatever was going on in the other part of the house, he wanted to know what it was. The two humans just sighed as they watched him exit the room. It was his life, after all. If he wanted to risk his neck, that was his problem. Making his way towards the bathroom, Goku clutched the two bottles to his chest and grinned happily. The argument between Bulma and Vegeta already forgotten. He hadn't understood most of what they had been saying, anyway, only that they were mad at each other for some strange reason. Completely forgetting to knock, he opened the door to the bathroom and walked inside the room. The door shut behind him with a soft click. Daddy? He asked tentatively, looking around for the familiar figure of his father. The sound of running water filled the air, and Goku's eyes focused in the direction of the source of the noise. Behind the plastic curtain, he could vaguely make out the familiar outline of his father, who seemed to be just standing there. Daddy? He asked again, walking towards the curtained-off area. The curtain peeled back to reveal a naked and soaking wet Bardock standing in a stream of water, looking at Goku questioningly. The boy opened his mouth to tell Bardock about the hair dye, but closed it when he saw the water spraying out of a pipe set into the wall. Wow, neat. There's a cloud inside that metal thingy. How'd you do that to us, son? You've never seen a shower before, Bardock chuckled, crouching down so his eyes were level with his son's. Goku lifted one hand behind his head in a confused gesture. Of course I have. Showers are when it rains outside, right? I've seen lots of those, but I've never seen it rain inside a house before. Not that kind of shower, the older Saiyan explained, utterly amused by his son's naivete. The shower I'm talking about is when someone pushes water through a pipe like this one, so you can get clean. It's kind of like being in a rainstorm, I guess. Except you can have hot or cold water. Looking at his son's smudged nose and arms speculatively, he added, Would you like to take a shower with me? Staring in awe at the rain-making pipe on the wall, Goku could only nod speechlessly. He quickly stripped off the blue gi he was wearing and hopped into the shower with his dad. A laugh bubbled from his lips as he was hit by the steaming water shooting out of the shower head. You were right, it's a rainstorm with hot water. This is neat, Daddy. Slipping on the slick surface of the tile floor, he lurched forward and grabbed onto Bardock's legs for support. Bardock laughed and ruffled Goku's now wet hair affectionately with one hand, reaching out with the other hand for the bottle labeled shampoo. During the trip to Earth, Trunks had explained the uses of various cleansers commonly stored in bathrooms. Hold still, Goku, he said, squeezing some of the bottle's contents into his hand. The boy did as he was told, while Bardock stared, massaging the fluid into the chibi's spiky black hair until it became a foamy mass of bubbles and hair. Hey, this is kinda like that bath Bulma made me take when I first met her. Goku exclaimed in delight. A blob of suds fell from his head and landed on his nose, making the 7-year-old giggle as he reached up to rub it off. Grinning mischievously, he reached up and wiped the foam onto his father's nose. Bardock grinned back at him and tickled the boy's chin with the tip of his tail. Goku laughed as he tried to fend off the pink and brown appendage. That reminds me. He wobbled over to the edge of the shower stall and reached past the curtain, picking up the 2 bottles he had abandoned on the floor. Bulma brought hair dye, too, son. Goku beamed up at the older man, quite pleased with himself as he offered the 2 bottles to his father. This one is brown, and this one is black. Me, Trunks, and Goten thought it'd help you feel better. Since you looked sad yesterday. The cheerful expression on his face turned to one of concern as he recalled how his father had looked before he had run outside. Seeing the concern written across his son's face, Bardock's face softened and he felt his heart melting inside him. As he took the 2 bottles and set them on the floor, he gave his son a warm smile and lifted the boy up to give him a strong hug. "Thank you, my son," he whispered, truly touched by the gesture. An inner resolve formed inside him as he realized that he could never hide his love for his family, even in the presence of strangers. Suppress it a little, maybe, but there was no way in hell he could maintain a cold exterior in the presence of such sunny dispositions as his son and grandson possessed. "You're welcome, Daddy," Goku said, smiling innocently as his father set him back down. "Hey, since you washed my hair, how about I wash yours? I can put that dye in for you, too." "Okay, it's a deal," Bardock replied, sitting down so his son could get at his hair. He smiled contentedly as he felt the boy's small fingers in his hair, spreading a cool, soothing wooing onto every strand. Behind him, Goku giggled a bit as he had fun playing with his father's hair even while he was putting the dye in. Even as wet as the stuff was, it was still trying to defy gravity. "You gotta keep your head out of the water for 5 minutes, Daddy," he stated, remembering what Bulma had said earlier, "so the dye will work." Bardock nodded his understanding and shifted his body to make sure his head was out of the path of the stream of water. Satisfied that he had done all he could with Bardock's hair, Goku picked up the other bottle of dye. "I'm gonna do your tail now, okay?" Not waiting for an answer, he grabbed his dad's tail and started to rub the brown dye in. Bardock cried out in pain and fell forward, curling up into a ball as waves of pain shot up and down his spine. He tried to tell Goku to let go of his tail, but the only thing that came out was a strangled whimper. Alarmed by the reaction, Goku guiltily released his dad's tail and knelt by his side. His eyes watered as he realized what he'd done. "Daddy? Are you okay? Daddy? I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. I was just trying to help, really. I'm sorry." Regaining a little bit of his strength, the Saiyajin warrior uncurled from his fetal position and sat up, gingerly holding his sore tail in one hand. He chuckled weakly and reached out to pull Goku into a comforting hug. "Shh, it's okay. You just squeezed too hard, that's all. I'll be fine." He figured he did a pretty good job at hiding the residual pain he was feeling, because his son relaxed in his arms and hugged him back. "But how about I finish putting the dye in my own tail?" he suggested warily. "You can finish cleaning up while I do that, then we can go give the dye to your brother." He repressed a shiver at the thought of having his tail squeezed again. No need to let his son know how much that had really hurt, or that he was afraid that it would happen again if he allowed his son a second chance. Fortunately for both of them, Goku accepted Bardock's decision without question or complaint. The two finished cleaning up, slowly relaxing in each other's company once again, but not quite to where they had been before the incident. When they were done, Bardock was pleased to note that his hair was once again solid black, and that his tail no longer sported any trace of pink. Smiling, he rubbed his son's hair dry, then followed suit with his own, while Goku pulled on his clothes. "Damn it to hell, Anna!" Vegeta cried out, covering his ears in pain. "Are you trying to make me deaf?" Bulma ignored him, looking as though she'd just been hit by a ton of bricks. She stared at Trunks' tail, then Vegeta's, then Goten's, and back to Trunks' tail. At a few moments, her mouth worked, but nothing came out. Finally gathering her wits, she stammered, "Why, you mean you're all aliens?" Trunks nodded, not willing to go into details about how he and Goten were only half alien. He didn't want to raise questions about who their parents were, especially not his parents. "Amazing! Diana has a brain," Vegeta commented sarcastically, "even if it's only large enough to comprehend the obvious. Which is more than I can say for you, monkey boy," she shot back. snapped out of her daze, as anger sparked again. No offense to you two, she hastily added, talking to Goten and Trunks. The two boys only grinned and shook their heads to indicate that they had taken no offense. Kami knew they were used to Bulma's insults by now. One corner of Vegeta's eyes started to twitch involuntarily as Bulma inadvertently used the insult that all Saiyajin hated with a passion. What did you call me? He hissed, between clenched teeth. His nostrils flared and his face darkened with rage as he took an aggressive step towards the offending Ningen. I called you monkey boy, Bulma taunted, unaware of the danger she was walking into. What, is your intelligence so low that you have to have me repeat myself? It must hurt to be that stupid. Three things happened at that moment. A curious Raditz stepped into the room in time to hear what Bulma had just said. An infuriated Vegeta roared and launched himself at Bulma, and a frantic Trunks threw himself between his parents, grappling with the Saiyan prince to keep him from killing the blue-haired girl. Let me go, brat! The prince screamed in fury as he was wrestled to the ground. No one insults the Saiyajin, no, AG, and lives. And I said, Trunks grunted as he pinned his father to the floor. No killing anyone who isn't a threat. Do I need to beat that into your thick skull, or will you calm down and behave? His angry blue eyes met Vegeta's furious obsidian eyes as a contest of wills raged back and forth between them. In the end, Vegeta growled and turned his head to the side, breaking eye contact in a gesture of defeat. Satisfied, the lavender-haired boy let go of the Saiyan and sat up, only to turn his glare on the startled-looking Bulma. And you, Bulma jumped in surprise. Do you have to use the most insulting term possible for a Saiyan? He asked, forgetting momentarily that this Bulma didn't know how infuriating the word monkey was. He would have forbidden them from insulting each other outright, except he knew that with Bulma and Vegeta there wasn't a chance in hell that would happen. Bulma blinked owlishly. Huh? Monkey, Raditz answered her shortly. You called Prince Vegeta a monkey. If you say that to a Saiyajin, you're practically begging to be attacked. He gave her an appraising look and folded his arms. I'm Raditz. I'm Bulma Briefs. Glancing at the newcomer, Bulma was, for the second time that day, struck speechless. Before her stood a teenage boy, perhaps 15 years old, with spiky black hair that fell in a mane down to his knees. His facial features were fine and delicate, but possessed a sense of strength that she found intriguing. He too had the graceful, muscled body of a fighter, though without the excessive bulk that bodybuilders had. The resemblance to Bardock wasn't as strong as Goku's was, but it was, nonetheless, unmistakable. Bulma knew without a doubt that this was the brother Goku had told her about. I think I'm in love. A faint blush crossed her cheeks as she stared unashamedly at the Saiyan teenager. She blinked. Speaking of brothers, you still haven't explained to me about Goten's relationship to Goku, she said, tearing her eyes away from the cute boy so she could impale Trunks with her gaze. She could ogle boys later. She was a woman, girl, on a mission, and she would not stop until she had the answers she sought. Now was the time to find out what was going on. Eyeing his mother's past self warily, Trunks squirmed uncomfortably beneath her stare. Even as an 11-year-old girl, she could still make him feel like a bug under a microscope. Goten is Goku's son, he muttered quickly, barely loud enough for everyone to hear. Nani? Bulma and Yamcha shrieked in unison. Yamcha had remained silent up until this point, figuring that Bulma could handle the situation without any help from him, but was unable to keep quiet any longer. All four Saiyajins present winced and covered their sensitive ears. Trunks sighed. He could already tell it was going to be a long day, starting with a long explanation. By the time Bardock and Goku emerged from the bathroom, still slightly damp but clean and fully clothed, Trunks and finished explaining his and Goten's presence in the past. Having gotten bored halfway through the explanation, Vegeta, Goten, and Raditz had gone outside to continue fishing for breakfast. Goten promising Trunks that he'd catch enough for his friend so that Trunks could finish the story and still be able to eat breakfast. Now that he had finally cleared everything up for Bulma and Yamcha, Trunks had rejoined his friend outside, only to find that, between the three Saiyans, they had already caught enough food to feed everyone, which lunch was now beginning to cook. When Trunks gave Goten a surprised look, Goten had shrugged and simply said, "We were bored, so we had a contest to see who could catch the most stuff the fastest. I won," he beamed with pride. Vegeta growled and stomped off to sit under the tree. Feeding 6 hungry Saiyajin and 5 Ningen is no simple matter, so breakfast was taking a long time. Bardock figured it was a perfect opportunity to begin teaching his son how to fly and fight, so he picked the boy up and headed to a slightly more secluded part of the island. Goten and Trunks had watched from a distance for a few minutes as the older Saiyan began explaining the basics of flight, then quickly grew bored and had started sparring against each other. By silent agreement, they had taken to the air and kept the fight well away from the island to avoid doing any damage to the place or its inhabitants. That left Vegeta and Reddit sitting on the beach with the stupefied Bulma and Yamcha. The two humans had gaped openly when the two Dema Saiyans had taken to the air, and they still wore their expressions of bewildered amazement. Vegeta snorted in amusement, then glanced at Raditz. Using his newly learned ability to sense ki, he appraised the older boy carefully, and found that he was pitifully weak in comparison to the Saiyajin no Oji. Unfortunately, all of the worthy potential sparring partners were occupied, leaving the prince with the only options of either waiting around uselessly for the human female to finish cooking breakfast, or sparring with the low-class teenager. It wasn't a difficult decision to make. "You," he said, looking directly at the other Saiyan Rabe. "Spare with me." At least there was someone he could still order around. With Bardock and the two Chibis all being stronger than him, Raditz was the only one he could count on to take him seriously due to his superior strength. "To spar with you," Raditz gulped, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. He knew perfectly well that Vegeta more than outstripped him in strength and skill. The blood drained from his face as he thought of the inevitable outcome that a fight with Vegeta would have for him. Vegeta would pound him into the dirt in no time. "Yes, spar with me, you baka. Low class," the prince snarled in annoyance. "Do you see anyone else around here who even knows how to fight?" "Hey, I can fight," Yamcha protested, wondering why Vegeta had dismissed him out of hand to casually. Vegeta just snorted in amusement and ignored him. "Raditz doesn't have to fight if he doesn't want to," Bulma said firmly, stepping between Raditz and Vegeta, when she realized that Raditz wasn't going to defend his rights against the younger boy. With her back to the teen, she couldn't see Raditz frantically shaking his head, but she did feel his hand on her shoulder, pulling her gently away from Vegeta. Her stomach fluttered wildly as she realized it was his hand that was touching her. "Vegeta is my prince," Raditz stated calmly, managing to keep his voice steady despite the sick feeling in his gut. "If he wants me to fight with him, I can only obey." Despite the paleness of his face, he managed to step past the human girl without any noticeable trembling. "Just make sure you don't injure him too badly," Bardock called sternly from above, where he was floating in the air holding one of Goku's hands. The child appeared to be having difficulty staying afloat, constantly dipping in altitude, sometimes depending completely on Bardock's grip to keep from plummeting to the ground. "We don't have any Senzu beans or regen tanks available, after all, and I'd rather not have my son spending the next several days recovering from sparring with you, Prince Vegeta." Scowling in irritation, the 10-year-old Saiyan nodded sharply. "Fine, I'll try not to damage him too much." He pulled off his shirt and crouched in a fighting stance, waiting for Raditz to do the same. As the teenager removed his shirt and shifted into a defensive position, Bulma promptly bit back any more protests about Raditz fighting Vegeta as she got a good look at his body. A dreamy expression clouded her eyes and drool started trickling from the corner of her mouth. Yamcha noticed this and frowned but said nothing. He was used to Bulma behaving oddly from time to time, though he'd never seen her act like this before. Up in the air, Bardock turned his attention back to his struggling son. Goku was an incredibly fast learner. He had to give him that, but he learned techniques incompletely. He had picked up on the concept of manipulating his ki to push himself off the ground, and had even succeeded in doing so within a few minutes, but maintaining his flight was another story entirely. He pulled his son up once again as the boy suddenly dropped towards the ground once again. "Come on, Goku, concentrate," he urged the boy, trying to keep his impatience out of the tone. His progress was, after all, quite remarkable considering he had only been working on it for the past half hour. Still, it became somewhat frustrating to watch his son constantly meet with partial success because of something as simple as a lack of concentration. It's easy once you get the hang of it, but in order to do that, you need to focus on what you're doing. If there was one thing Goku had problems with, it was his ability to focus on one thing for an extended period of time. "I'm sorry, Tuisin, but it's just that I'm so hungry." Goku whimpered. He really wanted to learn this technique. He really did. But hunger had always had a way of making him unable to concentrate on anything, no matter how important it was. As if to prove his point, his stomach growled loudly, and he dipped in the air again, only to be pulled up by his father before he could actually fall into the ocean. Bardock's sweat dropped at his son's excuse, then laughed sheepishly as he recalled what it was like to be 7 years old with an empty belly. No wonder he had poor attention right now. Breakfast should be about ready, and you've done well for your first try, so why don't we take a break, okay? Flipping Goku up onto his shoulders, he shot through the sky back towards the turtle house, both of them whooping with delight as the wind played through their hair and thoughts of good food cooked by lunch danced through their heads. He's taking it easy on me, Raditz noted, not sure whether to be annoyed or relieved. On the one hand, it was damn irritating to be thought of as weak enough that the prince had to pull his punches. On the other hand, he was grateful because he really would rather not end up spending the next few weeks in bed with every bone in his body broken. Narrowly dodging a lazy punch, he pushed aside all concerns about strength and weakness and concentrated only on the fight at hand. He had to admit, it felt good to finally be doing something physical for a change, exercising muscles that hadn't had a chance to be used in over a week. By silent agreement, both fighters remained firmly on the ground and relied only on their bodies, not using ki blasts of any sort. In this way, their bodies were put under more stress and the odds against Raditz were evened. Even if it was only by a little, it also made sure that no stray ki bombs hit the house. The only thing they had to worry about was not hitting the ground so hard that it sunk the island. Or in Vegeta's case, hitting his opponent so hard that it knocked him through the walls of the Kami house. All in all, it was definitely a challenge on both fighters' parts. Raditz winced as he blocked yet another kick from the superior Vegeta, gritting his teeth against the pain. Damn it, he's just too strong. Even blocking his blows hurts like hell. He inwardly cursed when his prince smirked and brought a fist into Raditz's gut, knocking the breath out of him and nearly breaking a rib in the process. Wait a minute, he's just completely left his guard down right there, probably because he's confident I won't be able to take advantage of it because of the pain I'm in right now. Guess it's up to me to prove him wrong, me? Grimacing through the pain, the older boy swept a leg around the other Saiyan's legs, knocking them out from under him. Sweat dripped into his eyes as he hastily jerked away from Vegeta, who had turned his fall into a roll that brought his feet up towards Raditz's unprotected crotch. That would have hurt if it had been successful. A lot. Leaping back to his feet, Vegeta grinned predatorily as he stalked towards his prey. He had been holding back the entire time to avoid ending the match too quickly, but that fall proved that Raditz, while pathetically weak compared to him, was at least a fairly intelligent opponent. Even so, I'm surprised he's managed to last this long against me. Raditz had managed to get the better of Vegeta in the fight, even if it was only for a brief moment, and now he would pay, and the young prince would enjoy every moment of it. With lightning speed that Raditz couldn't hope to match, he zipped in past the teenager's defenses and slammed a knee into the boy's stomach. Raditz doubled over the knee in agony, spitting up blood and saliva, though to his credit, he did not cry out. Vegeta was impressed. Smirking evilly, he decided to make an impression of his own by lacing his fingers together to form a doubled-up fist, which he smashed into Raditz's back with enough force to nearly snap his spine. Not quite, but enough that he would definitely be feeling that bruise for days. To his satisfaction, the older Saiyajin screamed in agony despite all his self-control. Vegeta snagged a handful of his opponent's spiky mane and lifted his head up to eye level. You should be proud of yourself, you know, the shorter boy said smugly, laughing at Raditz's pain-contorted features. You nearly made me break a sweat. With that, he disdainfully tossed the teen away and turned his back on him. Raditz's body hit the ground and continued to roll from the momentum of the throw until he came to a stop face down in the dirt at the horrified Bulma's feet. Vegeta ignored them and grabbed his shirt from off the ground, walking into the house so he could get cleaned up before breakfast was served. For a split second, Bulma was torn between the impulse to attack the stuck-up prince in hopes of inflicting some damage to either his body or his stupid pride and tending to the fallen warrior at her feet. Common sense and concern for Raditz quickly won out, and she knelt beside the battered teen and, with extreme exertion on her part, rolled him onto his back. Raditz was breathing heavily through his mouth, his eyes squeezed shut in pain as he fought to remain conscious. Bulma gently brushed her fingers across his cheek, marveling at how resilient the Saiyan boy was. She knew that if she had been through the same thing, she would probably be dead at this point. Her nimble fingers trailed down the teenager's defined chest and arms, tenderly probing for injuries and broken bones. As they encountered multiple bruises just beginning to turn purple and several cuts and scrapes. She winced in sympathy, cursing rather fluently under her breath. "Stupid bastard. Why do you have to pick on Raditz?" she muttered fiercely. Pulling a handkerchief from her purse so she could wipe some of the dirt from Raditz's wounds, she lifted her head and turned to face Yamcha, who had silently watched the fight from the shade of the tree. "Oi, Yamcha, go inside and get a first aid kit from Master Rosie," she ordered, "and make sure it has plenty of bandages and antibiotic." Shaking his head over Bulma's obvious attraction to the teenage Saiyan, Yamcha called back, "Okay, Bulma," and headed into the house to get the medical supplies she wanted. Bulma returned her attention to the object of her affections and smiled faintly, despite her concern. It felt good to put her hands on his well-muscled chest, to trace its curves and edges with her fingertips. A faint blush spread across her cheeks, making her glad that she was the only one outside right now. She giggled a bit as she fingered his well-defined biceps, imagining the strength that his arms possessed, and how good it would feel to have them wrapped around her. Running her hands through his wild mane of hair, she watched in fascination as nothing she did could rearrange the stubborn spikes. "Now there's a hairstylist nightmare," she chuckled inwardly. "Not that he doesn't look good with that hair, and it's so soft. I wonder what makes it spike up like that. Must be a Saiyan thing, 'cause the others have gravity-defying hair like this too, except for that boy Trunks. Is that a coincidence, or is there something different about Trunks?" "What do you think you're doing?" Raditz asked curiously, opening one eye. Bulma nearly jumped out of her skin and bit back a yelp of surprise, startled out of her train of thought. She snatched her hands back as though she'd burned them, blushing furiously. I was just checking your wounds," she stammered, staring at the ground in embarrassment. "In my hair?" Raditz asked wryly, arching one eyebrow questioningly. Bulma opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. "Damn it! Why can't I think of a good excuse? I'm supposed to be a genius, and I can't think of anything to say." Eyes darting wildly in search of something to distract Raditz from that line of questioning. She latched onto the form of Yamcha as he exited the house, a box with a red cross on it, firmly in hand. "Oh, there's Yamcha," she blurted out stupidly, jumping up and running over to her friend. "Stay right there until I have a chance to tend those injuries of yours." "Smooth? Bulma, real smooth. He must think I'm a total idiot now." She grabbed the first aid kit from Yamcha with a quickly muttered thanks, then swiftly returned to Raditz's side, opening the kit and pulling out gauze and rubbing alcohol. Eyeing her warily, Raditz tried to sit up, only to find Bulma's hands pushing him back down with all the strength she possessed. He raised his other eyebrow. Even injured as he was, he could easily overpower her if he wanted to. She must know that, so why bother trying to pin him? "You're not going anywhere until I've had a chance to clean those cuts," she snapped with all the force of her iron will behind her voice, making Raditz flinch involuntarily. "There's no need for that," he muttered in annoyance. "I'm not really that hurt. If Vegeta-sei had wanted to hurt me, I wouldn't be conscious right now, if not near death. As it is, I'll be fine with a little rest." Bulma scowled and Raditz squirmed under her scrutiny. "Listen, Buster. If those cuts don't get cleaned up, they might get an infection, and then no matter how much rest you wouldn't get any better. Saiyans don't get sick," he growled. "Or infections, for that matter. Our immune systems are very aggressive." In the background, Yamcha started grinning. "You don't disagree with Bulma, Raditz, no matter how strong you are," he thought smugly. "She always gets her way in the end. It's just a question of how unpleasant it is for you until she gets what she wants." Deciding he wanted to be as far away as possible should Bulma pull one of her famous tantrums, he went back inside the house to await breakfast. True to Yamcha's silent predictions, Bulma's face darkened and her eyes narrowed. "You will let me clean those cuts, or you will regret it. Radiats," she pronounced in a voice deadly enough to make the bravest man quail in fear. Never mind the fact that it came from the mouth of an 11-year-old girl. There's a first time for everything, and I'd rather that first time not be this time. Radiats suddenly felt the urge to wriggle nervously under her glare. "Do as she says, Radiats," Bardock's stern, commanding voice rang clearly through the air, drawing everyone's attention to the speaker. The tall warrior landed softly on the beach, Goku on his shoulders, and walked over to stand in front of his downed son. The obsidian chips that were his eyes drilled into Radiats in a way that brooked no argument. "Just because Saiyans don't get sick often doesn't mean we don't get sick. And I'd rather not have you laid low by some Chikyu disease we've never heard of before." Bardock's eyes searched his son's face for any sign of rebellion, almost seeming to see into the teenager's very soul, then nodded once, satisfied, and turned his penetrating gaze on Bulma. He said nothing, but his look clearly told her that if she harmed his son in any way, she would pay the consequences. Bulma nodded her understanding, a little paler than before, and he turned back toward the house, swinging Goku down off his shoulders before then walked through the door. Dropping his head back to the ground in resignation, Beerus glared up at the sky while Bulma began rubbing alcohol onto the lacerations that crisscrossed his body, hissing between his teeth at the sting of the liquid seeping into the broken flesh. It was nothing like the soothing comfort that being submersed in a regen tank offered, something that he missed terribly at this point. He forced himself not to flinch as she began to bind the various injuries that covered his body, although he couldn't help the flush of humiliation that tinged his cheeks pink. I can't believe that I'm allowing myself to be tended to by this weakling Chibiana as though I were some kind of invalid, or that I'm even showing my weakness for everyone to see. What a pitiful excuse for Saiyajin I am. Why? He suddenly asked her, shifting his gaze from the infinite blue expanse to lock onto her equally blue eyes. What? She asked, startled by the abruptness of the question. She stared into this black eyes, feeling as though she was about to fall into them. She blinked, momentarily breaking the spell he had cast on her. Why are you doing this? He asked bluntly, his penetrating gaze boring holes into her soul. Bulma was suddenly aware of her heart pounding in her chest, in her ears, even in her stomach. She couldn't stop looking into Raditz' eyes, couldn't think, couldn't breath. The only she was aware of were his eyes, and her heartbeat. Somewhere in the back of her mind, where her thought processes were only slightly impaired, her mind was screaming at her to say something, before she made a total fool out of herself. You're, Goku's brother and, she finally managed to blurt out, feeling her cheeks burning hotly. Mentally cursing herself for an idiot, she finished wrapping the final bandage and hastily stuffed the remaining supplies back into the first aid kit. Breakfast should be ready. Why don't we, go eat? With that said, she stood up and fled, leaving behind a very confused Raditz. What was that all about? He asked, out loud, staring at Bulma's retreating form. He gingerly sat up, being mindful of his injuries, and thought back on the past couple of minutes. Vegeta beats the crap out of me. I nearly lose consciousness. When I regain my senses, that little girl is messing with my hair. Then she insists on cleaning and binding my wounds with my father backing her up. I ask her why she's so concerned about me, and I'm not certain I believe the answer she gave me. Frowning to himself, he got to his feet and headed for the house, mulling the mystery over in his head. Why did she care about me? Why didn't she want to tell me the truth? And why were her cheeks red like that? It's almost as though she were... Whoa, wait a damn moment. She was not blushing. No way. Unfortunately, the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. She can't have feelings for me. She's, what, 10? 11 years old? And besides which, we're not even the same species. How could she possibly be attracted to me? With these thoughts in mind, it was with no little apprehension that he walked into the house where Vegeta, Goku, Bardock, Krillin, Yamcha, Master Roshi, and Bulma all waited in the kitchen for lunch to serve breakfast. Now that he knew what to look for, Raditz plainly saw the rapturous looks the blue-haired girl threw his way and recognized them for what they were. He thought that he should be flattered by her attention, but really, it made him feel slightly sick. I am not a pervert who likes little girls. He wanted to shout at her, and last time I checked, I don't date outside my species. Hoping that maybe she would get a clue, he ignored her and edged to the far side of the room. Bardock gave his son a once-over, examining him to make sure he was all right, without appearing to show too much concern. Then returned his attentions to Vegeta, who looked as though he had recently stepped out of the shower. Vegeta's gaze flickered to Raditz long enough to smirk at the older boy, then shifted back to watching lunch set food on the table. Woman, how long must I be kept waiting? He growled, petulantly. Well, we've got to wait until Trunks and Goten return, she answered simply. It would be rude to start without them. I am the prince of all Saiyans. I do not see why I must wait for two Bake half-breed brats for any reason. Even if one of them is my son, he added to himself. Bulma's ears almost visibly perked up at the mention of Vegeta's words, and she stopped eyeing Raditz in favor of giving Vegeta a scrutinizing look. What do you mean, half-breed? I thought Trunks and Goten were Saiyans like you. Bakana! Vegeta snorted. Goten looks Saiyan enough, but how even someone as stupid as you could mistake Trunks for a full-blooded Saiyajin is beyond me. Narrowing her eyes dangerously, Bulma had a hard time deciding whether to pursue her line of questioning or rise to the prince's bait. She was already furious with the 10-year-old for beating Raditz up like that and implying he was weak, so insulting her was only adding fuel to the fire. However, when Trunks had explained their situation to her, he had not mentioned anything about him being half-breed, half-Sai, half-what. The enigma was enough to catch the interest of Bulma's scientific side, and she literally itched to know more. Finally deciding that she might not ever have another chance to fish for information again. Whereas she would have plenty of opportunities to insult his royal pain in the ass, she pushed aside her ire for the moment, and concentrated on what was important. So, if they're half-breed Saiyans, what's the other half? Suddenly noticing where the conversation was heading, Bardock reached out and clamped a hand over his prince's mouth, scowling darkly at the boy to let him know not to answer that question. He turned his cool gaze back to Bulma and said, I don't think we should answer that. Knowing too much about the future can be dangerous. Vegeta glared up at the older man and roughly pulled his head away from Bardock's hand. Unfortunately, Bardock was stronger than him, so there was nothing he could do about that affront to his pride, except mutter darkly about training to become stronger and teaching Bardock that the Saiyajin no Uji was not someone to take lightly. Bardock ignored him. Glaring at Bardock, Bulma placed her hands on her hips and drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't very much compared to Bardock. What's so dangerous about knowing what race their parents are? She queried, a definite edge to her voice. A thoughtful look crossed Bardock's face as he stared down at the human girl. Hypothetically, what if that race were human, and one of the parents was in this room? Or perhaps one of you knows one of the parents, or might meet them later on. What would happen if that parent somehow found out they later on have a half-Sierra child? Don't you think it might have an effect on the future? He raised an eyebrow questioningly at Bulma. He knew that Goten's mother was someone named Chi-Chi, but he had no idea who Trunks' mother was. It really was quite possible that Bulma knew or will know Trunks' mother someday. Eyeing him suspiciously, Bulma tried to figure out if he was being completely honest about this, or if he was really trying to just throw her off the trail. In the end, though, what he said made too much sense to be ignored. I guess you're right, she sighed. Though I still don't quite see how much harm it would be just knowing what race the other parent is. It's not like knowing their race will tell me who the parents are. Bardock shrugged uncomfortably. She did have a point, but he really would rather not even go into the subject of who the parents were. Better to be safe than sorry, after all. Especially considering that he didn't think Vegeta knew what race his future mate was. Bardock had a fairly good idea that it was human, since Trunks was obviously raised on Earth. But since he couldn't be sure, it was best that he just keep his mouth shut for now. Outside, and a fair distance away from the island where the others were, Goten and Trunks floated above the ocean, facing each other, both in Super Saiyajin form and panting slightly. They grinned in unison and dropped out of their defensive stances, wiping sweat from their brows as they glanced at the slowly rising sun. Trunks, I'm hungry. Goten complained, clutching his stomach as it growled loudly. His wide, innocent blue-green eyes locked onto Trunks' matching orbs in a pleading look. Do you think maybe breakfast is ready? Only one way to find out. Trunks grinned, rubbing his own empty belly in anticipation of another wonderful meal cooked by lunch. Race you back to the house, Goten. He powered up and sped off towards the dark speck on the horizon that was the Turtle Island. Hey, no fair. That's cheating, the younger Demisaiyan protested. In a flash, he charged up and flew after his friend as fast as he could. I'm gonna beat you, Trunks. In your dreams, Goten. The two boys raced back to Kamen's house, Trunks in the lead, with Goten trailing not far behind. For the two Super Saiyan chibis, it was only a matter of seconds before they reached the island, barely touching their feet onto the ground before they took off at a dead run for the house. Fortunately for the building, the door was still open and it was unnecessary for either boy to open it. Given that they were still powered up, the door probably would have been torn off its hinges by one of the two hyperactive boys. I won! I won! I won! Trunks laughed, dashing into the kitchen where everyone else was waiting impatiently. No fair. You had a head start, Goten pouted angrily. folding his arms and giving his friend a look that said that he thought he should have won. The blonde 9-year-old shrugged and grinned. Hey, come on, it's not like it's the end of the world or anything. Trunks reached out and tugged his friend's tail. Playfully, not enough to hurt, but just enough to show his friendship. Besides, now we're here, and we can have breakfast. Goten immediately brightened up and he cheered, Yeah, breakfast. I'm starving. If you're so hungry, then why the hell did it take you so long to get here? Vegeta snarled bad-temperedly. Once again he was being shown physical proof in the form of the 2 Super Saiyan chibis that he had been surpassed twice, even if they were both from the future. On top of that, he was hungry as well, and being made to wait had done nothing to improve his less-than-pleasant demeanor. I guess we got distracted, Goten explained sheepishly, placing one hand behind his head in the hereditary San family gesture as he grinned. Goten-sei. Whoa, hold on a sec, Bulma interrupted, her hands on her hips, as she leveled her best glare at the 2 blonde boys. Who are you 2, and why didn't anyone tell me about 2 more Saiyans? They were obviously Saiyans because they both had tails like Saiyajin have, and they looked familiar, especially the smaller one when he had grinned in that goofy sort of way. What's she talking about, Trunks? What 2 Saiyans? Goten looked at his friend in a puzzled manner, then glanced around the room in hopes of spotting the mysterious 2 extra Saiyans. Trunks mirrored his friend as he too searched the kitchen for signs of any other Saiyans, until he happened to look at Goten again. Oh, I get it. Goten, power down, you dummy. You're still in Super. Scowling at his friend, Goten dropped out of Super Saiyan mode, his golden hair shifting back to its normal black and shot back. Hey, if I'm a dummy, then you are too, 'cause you're also in Super. The 9-year-old boy flushed slightly in embarrassment as he realized that the younger chibi was right. He quickly reverted to his normal mode, yellow spikes of hair suddenly becoming limp and purple, falling back to their original bowl cut. Eyes wide as saucers, Bulma could only gape for a minute as the 2 boys transformed from complete strangers into the 2 sweet little kids she had met earlier that day. Beside her, Yamcha was equally surprised, while Master Roshi and Krillin only looked slightly startled. They had, after all, already witnessed Trunks turning into a Super Saiyan. Lunch couldn't care less, as she just smiled sweetly and set a large pot of rice on the table along with the rest of the food she'd already prepared. Well, since we're all here, you can all start eating now, she said brightly as she headed back to the kitchen to tend to the other things she was cooking. 1 tableful of food was not going to be enough to feed 6 hungry Saiyans and 5 humans, no matter how high the food was piled. Food? Goku, Goten, and Trunks cried out in simultaneous crows of delight as they literally attacked the food on the table. Not far behind them, though slightly more restrained in their decimation of the miniature mountain, Bardock, Raditz, and Vegeta joined in, making a total of 6 people-shaped vacuum cleaners that seemed to inhale food faster than the humans could inhale air. Beads of sweat rolled down the back of the heads of everyone present as they watched the living black holes exert their powers over the food. Good. Kami and I thought Goku was bad. Bulma muttered, the incident with the color-changing hair already forgotten. Watching Bardock and Raditz eat made her realize that Goku's appetite was relatively small, if such a word could be used to describe the amount of food Goku could put away in just a few minutes, compared to an adult Saiyan's appetite. She was glad that she and Yamcha had already eaten breakfast, because she did not want to try to compete with those 6 for food. Instead, she settled for watching Raditz as he ate, noting how he seemed to be moving rather gingerly because of his wounds. Figuring this was the perfect opportunity for her to try to get closer to the teenager, she sat down next to Raditz and scooched a little closer to him. If he had been human, she would have offered to help feed him so he wouldn't have to move around as much, but she didn't think she could keep up with that appetite. How did you get your hair back to normal, Dad? Raditz mumbled through a mouthful of food, raising an eyebrow as he examined Bardock's once again black hair. Bardock was about to answer, but Bulma cut him off, seeing this as a great way to catch Raditz's attention. I brought some hair dye over, she told him proudly, idly dropping a hand to rest on his thigh. Maybe if she dropped enough hints, he'd get the idea that she liked him. Raditz frowned warily at her and scooted away from her, so her hand was no longer on his thigh. In response, she only edged closer to him than before. Brown and black, her eyes once again drifted over his bandaged injuries, and she flipped her hair over her shoulder flirtatiously, smiling at the older boy. Since you're probably in a lot of pain, maybe I could wash your hair for you, she suggested in the most seductive voice she could manage. She was surprised when Raditz suddenly started choking on his food, bits and pieces flying from his mouth as he tried to cough some rice out of his food. You know, you should be more careful eating, she scolded, slapping him on the back a few times, both to help him clear his airway and as an excuse to put her hands on him again. Jumping like a spooked rabbit, Raditz leapt away from the table, sweating nervously. "I'm fine," he half-shouted. "It's just that," he trailed off, eyes darting for a good excuse to flee the house. His gaze settled on the small form of his brother, who was still tackling the food as though he would never see a meal like it again, and he hastily plucked the boy away from the table. "Kakarot and I need to talk," he blurted out in a rush, practically running out of the room. "Hey, I wasn't done eating yet," Goku protested with a look of confusion and longing on his face, as he took one last look at the table of food before he lost sight of it. "And what's a kakarot? You and Tusen have both mentioned it now, and I still don't know what it is." "Sorry, kid, but I needed to get away from your friend," Raditz explained, slightly sheepish, once they were out of hearing range of the others. "Besides which, you and I haven't really had a chance to talk yet. We can eat later. I'm sure that lunch will have plenty more food when we get back." "Oh, okay, but you didn't answer my question, Nichiren," Goku said. "What's a kakarot?" Blinking down at the boy he held in his arms, Raditz recalled that his father had been referring to his brother as Goku. "Kakarot is the name you were given as a baby." Goku appeared to think this over for a moment, then asked in a confused voice, "So I have 3 names? Son Goku Kakarot?" "Yeah, I guess so, kid," Raditz chuckled. "Which name do you like best?" "Goku," the 7-year-old said adamantly, as though there was never any question about it. "That's the name my grandpa Gohan gave me, and he's the one who raised me." A hint of sadness crept into Raditz's heart at this, hearing his little brother reject, even in so small a way, his Saiyan heritage. He shook his head to clear away the emotion and headed for the front door of the house. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Goku squirmed a little in his brother's arms as though he would prefer to walk under his own power. Fortunately for him, Raditz noticed this and set the boy down. A few moments of silence passed as the two walked outside together. I don't really know," the older boy admitted with chagrin. "Maybe we could spar a little, see how strong you are compared to your Oni-chan." He cast a curious look at the miniature version of his father. He really didn't quite know what to make of the kid. He was too innocent and trusting, traits he'd apparently picked up from hitting his head too hard as a child and then being raised by the soft Chekyujin. However, he was his brother, which counted for something, and he was still Saiyajin, even if he didn't act like it. Beyond that, he didn't really know enough about his sibling to really be able to judge him. At the mention of fighting, Goku visibly perked up, and he grinned eagerly. "Sure, I'd love to spar with you." At that moment, Raditz thought that his brother was acting more Saiyajin than he had during the entire 2 days he had observed the kid. Then he blew the whole image by allowing a concerned look across his face. "But, aren't you hurt?" he asked, pointing at the bandages that concealed the injuries he'd received during his spar with Prince Vegeta. "It's not as bad as it looks," Raditz shrugged it off casually. "Saiyajin tend to heal pretty quickly, and Vegeta Uji took it fairly easy on me." Not wanting to look bad in front of his little brother, he conveniently forgot to mention that taking it easy on Raditz for Vegeta had still done more damage to him than he cared to admit. Besides, the boy couldn't be much of a match for him at his age, even as injured as the teen was. "I can probably handle anything you can throw at me," he boasted cockily. In response to the clear challenge in Raditz's voice, the 7-year-old smirked and crouched down in a defensive position that Raditz didn't recognize, but for all that it was unfamiliar, was quite flawless. Once again revealing his Saiyan heritage, the teenager grinned and got into his own stance, thinking to himself about how this was much more preferable than sitting inside that house trying to avoid that ninja female's advances. "Begin," he stated simply. Watching his son flee in something as close to panic as he'd ever seen the boy, Bardock's eyes sparkled with concealed amusement. He knew exactly what his oldest son had been running from, or to be more specific, who he had been running from. As he watched the human girl's expression shift to disappointment at Raditz's disappearance, it was all he could do to keep himself from chuckling at the situation. It was rather enjoyable to see his son squirm like that. Bardock wasn't the only one to notice Bulma's attraction to the teenage Saiyan. Vegeta had no such qualms about hiding his laughter, and promptly burst out laughing when he realized what was going on between Bulma and Raditz. For several moments, all he could do was clutch his sides and laugh derisively, completely ignoring the food in front of him. You're in love with him," he gasped out between bursts of laughter. "I don't believe it. The weakling Anna has a crush on a Saiyan warrior. This is too rich." He broke off into another fit of mocking laughter, wiping tears from his eyes with one hand. Shame and humiliation burned in her cheeks as Bulma could do nothing but sit there and stare at the table. She couldn't even deny it because it was true. Damn it. It wasn't the fact that it was true that irked her so much as it was the fact that if she opened her mouth to say anything, the only thing she could say would be an admission of that Bacchiaro being right. She would die before she did that. What? The Baka Anna has nothing to say? Vegeta smirked broadly, brain too slow to think up a good lie. This was too much. She'd just been humiliated. Had her newfound feelings discovered and ridiculed, and now this boy dared to insult her intelligence. Blinking back hot, salty tears, she rounded on the child prince, clenching her fists tightly as the desire to punch him in the face warred with the knowledge that such an action would do her no good. "I'll have you know that I'm one of the most intelligent people on this planet," she shouted angrily. "My father and I invented those capsules you've been using to store things in. You know, I don't care what great things you think you've done, Anna," Vegeta remarked lazily. Leaning back in his chair, "You're still a Bakachibi, Anna. My father and I invented those capsules." The words rang inside Bardock's mind, echoing back and forth, and shoving all other thoughts out of his head. My father and I invented those capsules." Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory stirred and another voice spoke in his mind, speaking words that were eerily similar to the ones that Bulma had just said. "These are hoi poi capsules. My mom and grandpa make them." Trunks had spoken those words back on Vegeta-sei, what seemed like months ago, but was in reality only a week or two. Trunks, Vegeta's son, my mom and my grandpa make them. My father and I invented those capsules. It finally clicked inside Bardock's brain, and he could only stare in fascinated horror at the fiery-tempered girl and the equally hot-headed prince, who were currently trading insults back and forth faster than any barrack soldier, and more colorful ones at that. Massacred. Bardock's stunned mind could barely comprehend the revelation he'd just received. Bulma and Vegeta? No way. Sitting in the living room of Capsule Corporation were Goku, Chi-Chi, Gohan, Bulma, and Vegeta, all wearing faces revealing various levels of anxiety, worry, and grief. Vegeta tried to hide his emotions, but if one knew what to look for, it was evident that the loss of his son had hit him just as hard as the others. A heavy silence filled the air, nearly suffocating in its intensity. Finally, Trunks took the spaceship and a large amount of food with him. Gohan stated for what was probably the 100th time since they had discovered the Demi-Saiyan's absence only a few days before. They had actually noticed he was gone when Bulma and Vegeta had woken up the morning after Goku had gone to Hell to look for Goten. But at the time, it hadn't seemed like a big deal. They'd figure that he had probably gone off to mope somewhere about not being allowed to go to Hell with Goku. Trunks was a big boy, he could take care of himself. It wasn't until Bulma had happened to find that the spaceship was missing, which had happened the second day of Trunks' absence, that they'd managed to figure out that he had run away. He probably went to Nune Mech to collect the Dragon Balls there. Vegeta snarled, "If you don't quit stating the obvious, brat, I'll—" "Calm down, Vegeta," Bulma snapped at her husband. "Threatening Gohan isn't going to get us anywhere." The Saiyajin no Uji glared at his mate, but closed his mouth anyway, opting to stare sullenly off into space. "Anyway, Goku, I know you said that Trunks is suppressing his ki, so you can't get a lock on him and bring him back home with your Shokunedu, but maybe you could just go to Nune Mech and wait for him to get there. If my calculations are correct, that ship's modifications should make it fast enough to get there by tomorrow afternoon, our time." His face visibly brightening, Goku leapt to his feet. "Hey, that's a great idea, Bulma. In fact, why don't I go there right now and get a head start on gathering the Dragon Balls?" He grinned in that goofy way that only he and his family could manage. "Do you have a dragon radar I could borrow?" "Sorry, Sun-kun, I don't," Bulma grumbled, scowling darkly. "I only had the 2 radars to begin with. Goten had the original, and Trunks took off with the spare. I could probably rig up another one, but it'll take a couple of hours." She stood up abruptly and stalked off towards her lab, eager to do something to get her mind off the situation and possibly be of some use for a change. 2 hours later, The blue-haired genius emerged from her workroom, with a triumphant smirk on her face. When I first made the Dragon Radar, it took me days just to put it together correctly, not even counting the time it took to make the plans. But being the brilliant, beautiful genius that I am, it only took me 2 hours to build a new one from scratch. She flipped her hair over her shoulder and laughed cockily, then handed the radar over to Goku. Now go get those Dragon Balls. Son Goku. Smiling cheerfully, Goku raised 2 fingers to his forehead and vanished in the blink of an eye. Figuring that it would take at least a day before her husband would return, Chi-Chi and Gohan started saying their goodbyes to Bulma, Vegeta, and Dr. Briefs, who had walked in soon after Goku teleported off the planet. Just as the 2 remaining members of the Sun family were about to leave the building, however, guys? Goku said nervously, flickering back into existence with an anxious look on his face. There's kind of a problem. Well, are you just going to beat around the bush all day, or are you going to tell us? Chi-Chi asked impatiently, waving her arms in annoyance. Well, it's about Trunks. The spiky-haired warrior scratched the back of his head sheepishly. When I got there, the name said that Trunks had already been there and used the Dragon Balls to wish himself into the past to find Goten. They'd also already used the other 2 wishes, so the namesake Dragon Balls are dormant for another Namekian year. What? Bulma screeched. But that's not possible. There's no way that ship could be fast enough to have already gotten there. Oh, you mean that old spaceship we had sitting in the backyard? Dr. Briefs asked curiously. I've been meaning to tell you, dear. I made some rather interesting modifications to that thing a while back, so it's probably a little faster than it was before. Plus, there's a karaoke machine, a dishwasher, an automatic manicure machine, a new... He continued on in this vein for a few more minutes, describing all the modifications he'd made to the ship, most of them fairly useless. Great, Gohan muttered sarcastically. So Goten and Trunks are who knows where and who knows when without a time machine, and we can't use the Dragon Balls to bring them back until one of the sets has had a chance to regenerate. What are we going to do now? Silence reigned as everyone, excluding the babbling Dr. Briefs, tried to think of a way to rescue Goten and Trunks. Part 2, things get weird. Everything up until this point actually happens in the story. However, from this point on, nothing applies to the storyline. As the title of this part says, things get weird. None of this actually happens in the story, and the characters are purposefully OPS, out of story. Kinda like out of character, so don't flame me for it. Bulma suddenly crowed triumphantly. Bulma, you are a genius. Why didn't I think of this before? I know exactly how we can get Trunks and Goten back here. She whirled around excitedly and even went so far as to grab a startled Vegeta in a big hug, less than pleased with his mate's behavior. The short prince growled and tried to dislodge himself from the puny female's grip. Not that it mattered, because as soon as he started to struggle, she let go of him and grinned broadly at the 3 sons. So how do we get them back? Goku chirped, literally dancing from one foot to the other. Well, Bulma drawled, narrowing her eyes dangerously as she continued to smile. Who's responsible for this whole mess in the first place? That's easy, Vegeta snorted. It's that pathetic Kakaro's fault. 1, because if he didn't exist, none of this would ever have happened. 2, he's responsible for the existence of his second brat who dragged my son into this mess. Oh, be quiet, Vegeta, the petite scientist snapped, in annoyance. Besides, I'm talking about someone else. Goten? Gohan ventured tentatively. After all, Goten was the one who made the wish. No. The Eternal Dragon? If not for the Eternal Dragon misinterpreting the wish in the first place, Goten would never have ended up in the past. No. Dende's sense of humor tended to rub off on his creation, making it so you had to be extra careful in making your wishes if you didn't want unpleasant results. No. Come on, Bulma, tell us. Goku pleaded, giving her his best patented sun puppy eyes. It was... Pausing dramatically, Bulma let her gaze shift to each person in the room, locking eyes with them momentarily before moving on. Brenda. Huh? Who's Brenda? Chi-Chi asked, confusion plainly evident in her voice. Bulma rolled her eyes. Don't you remember that red-haired girl from the party? She's the author of this story. If we can just get hold of her, we can get her to undo this whole mess and bring our kids back. That would be a fairly decent idea. Anna, except for one little detail. Vegeta cut in, rudely, folding his arms in an intimidating manner. You forgot that the blasted Anna doesn't even live in this dimension. Just how are we supposed to get our hands on her in the first place? Just leave that to me, Bulma cackled, heading once more for her lab. Having nothing better to do, and since they were curious to see what she had planned, Goku, Gohan, Chi-Chi, and Vegeta all followed her. Whistling a cheerful tune, Brenda sauntered down the street, happily twirling her magic author pen between her fingers. The wind blew through her long, red-brown hair, causing it to trail behind her like a banner. Dressed in jeans and a blue t-shirt, she fit in with the crowd of people that streamed past her in both directions. It was a beautiful sunny day, the perfect kind for going to the park, which just happened to be where the author was heading. She had just left her readers with a rather evil cliffhanger, although it wasn't the worst she'd done to them, and so she was feeling pretty good. Suddenly, a smoky gray portal flashed into existence right in front of her and began pulling the teenager into its opaque depths. With a startled yelp, she backpedaled with all her might. But it was in vain. The portal dragged her inexorably forward, despite everything she did. In desperation, she even grabbed hold of one of the people passing by in hopes that the other girl could pull her out. The brown-haired girl looked startled, then panicked, as, instead of being able to rescue Brenda, she only got pulled into the dimensional tunnel along with her. "Whis!" they screamed in unison, as everything went gray for several long, terrifying seconds. When the swirling gray cloud vanished, the two girls found themselves in an unfamiliar place, no longer outside, but in a room filled with lots of high-tech equipment in it. Before she had a chance to recover from the shock of suddenly being yanked out of her dimension, Brenda found herself being picked up by the front of her shirt and slammed into a wall hard enough to cause her to see stars. Blinking rapidly, she had just enough time to focus on her attacker before he growled in a menacing tone. "What did you do with my son, brat?" Oh. Brenda finally managed to get a clear view of the man holding her against the wall. He looked eerily familiar, as though she'd met him somewhere. Wait a minute, I have met him. At that 200 review a special party. Nani, eh? Vegeta? Nani? Vegeta? Where? The girl who had unwillingly accompanied the author jerked her head up and looked around the room. Spotting Vegeta, she gave a cry of delight. Yadio! Vegeta winced as the girl's piercing voice penetrated his sensitive Saiyan ears. Anna, do you have to yell so loudly? And don't call me Veggie-chan. Oh, all right, the girl conceded happily. How about Geta then? The proud Saiyan prince's eye began to twitch and he shouted, no. Pouting cutely, the girl gave Vegeta her best imitation of the famous sun puppy eyes, TM, and said, come on! I've waited a good portion of my life to meet you, so I think I should get to call you a few pet names. Please, Veggie-poo. Glancing around the lab curiously, she added, oh, and what are we doing here anyway? Before Vegeta could respond angrily, Bulma stepped between the girl and her husband. Sorry about that, but I don't think you were supposed to come in the first place. We only wanted Brenda, you see, she said, pointing at the girl that Vegeta was still holding against the wall. Speaking of which, Vegeta, put her down. The stocky warrior complied, growling low in his throat. Only when Bulma added a death glare and a softly muttered threat about a couch and a GR room. I'm Bulma Briefs, and this is my husband, Vegeta. That's Son Goku and his wife, Son Chi-Chi, and their son, Son Gohan. We already know Brenda, but who are you? The girl's eyes widened as far as they would go, and she jumped up to her feet, literally glowing with excitement. Wow. Yeah, I know who you all are. This so unbelievably, totally, completely, utterly, truly, fantastically awesome. Oh, hi, Brenda. I'm Chibi Casey, by the way. I'm a great fan of everyone in this room. But wait a second, Bulma. Didn't you say you calibrated that machine to make it so that only Brenda could fall through? Gohan piped up, looking confused. Well, that's not quite true, Gohan. Because of a complication in the circuitry that would take too long to explain. Only one other person could have fallen through the dimensional tunnel. And that someone is the 700th reviewer for Brenda's story. Wish for the past. I guess that means that Chibi Casey is that person and just happened to be near enough to the dimensional tunnel to fall in it. Picking up a little gray box, she smiled at the brown-haired girl. Well, it's only a matter of pressing this little button here and I can send you back to your own dimension. Sorry about the trouble. Hold on 1 second, Bulma, Chibi Casey said, pausing to take in a huge breath. Once she got a lungful, she screamed, No, don't send me back. Not yet. There's way too much for me to do. At least let me see a Dragon Ball before I go. Sorry, kid, but it really messes things up to have more than one person from another dimension here in this world. Gotta send you back. The cerulean-haired genius waved cheerfully and pressed the button on her little gray box, opening another portal to the real world, which promptly sucked the 700th reviewer inside and vanished. There, now, let's get back to what we originally intended to do. Vegeta once again turned his patented death glare on Brenda. Now, little Anna, where is my son? Brenda squeaked. Hey, Vegeta, you don't have to be so mean, Goku protested. I bet if we just ask her nicely, she'll give us back our children. I'm the Prince of all Saiyans. I do not ask. Brenda stammered hesitantly. Could you, put me down, please? Not until you return, Trunks, to this time. Vegeta snapped. And Goten, he added as an afterthought, almost grudgingly. Probably because, even though he didn't like the boy, he would have to face his mate, Kakarot. Kakarot's baka mate, and Kakarot's other brat if he didn't include Goten in his demands. For once, I agree with Vegeta. Chi-Chi chipped in, folding her arms in front of her chest. You told me you'd bring my baby boy back. That was what, 10, 20 chapters ago? Well, where is he? Brenda squirmed uncomfortably. Well, he's still in the past. We know that already, Bakan. Vegeta glowered harshly at the teenage author. Now bring him back before I end your pathetic excuse for a life. A look of annoyance crossed Brenda's features. As much as I agree with you about the state of my life, there's not a darn thing I can do about Goten and Trunks right now. So, lay off, will ya? But you're the author. You can do anything. Goku chirped, pointing at Brenda's magic author pen. Hey, that's it. That's the key to your power. All we gotta do to get Goten and Trunks back is use that pen thingy. With childlike innocence and wonder, Goku snatched the pen from Brenda's hand and pulled the cap off. Now, how does this thing work? Hey, give that back, Brenda protested. She would have lunged for it, except that she was still firmly pinned against the wall. She glared angrily at Vegeta. Do you mind? Let me go, you beast. Surprisingly enough, the Saiyan warrior smirked and complied, releasing his hold on the teenager's shirt and taking a few steps back. Thanks. Meanwhile, Goku was waving the pen around as he'd seen Brenda do so often. Okay, pen. I want Goten and Trunks back here, he ordered sternly. When nothing happened, he stared at the thing with puzzlement. Please? He added hopefully. After all, please was a magic word. Unfortunately, it apparently wasn't the magic word needed for this pen. Stalking over to the younger Saiyan, Vegeta grabbed the pen away from him. Give me that, Baka. You're more likely to poke someone's eye out than actually figure out how to work it. He reached over and grabbed a piece of paper from Bulma's desk, then neatly wrote out, and then Trunks and Goten returned to the Earth of their own timeline. With a self-satisfied smirk, he capped the pen and waited for the magic to work. Nothing happened. Maybe I forgot to tell you this, but Brenda trailed off, grinning insanely. The magic author pen only works in my dimension, and that particular pen only works for me. Like I said, there's not a thing I can do about Goten and Trunks. Mwahaha. Well then, that means that you're powerless while you're here, Vegeta stated, with a dangerous edge to his voice. And if you harm me, Veggie-chan, Brenda shot back. Regaining some of her confidence, then I won't ever finish the story and the two boys will remain forever in the past. So, there, smirking in a manner very similar to Vegeta's. She walked over and grabbed her pen from the astonished prince, and if you even think about accompanying me back to my dimension and using your powers to make me do what you want, keep in mind that when we return to my dimension, I'll have all my mighty author powers back, ha 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 ha. Damn it. There's nothing we can do, Bulma seethed. Yup, Brenda agreed cheerfully. Now, send me back to my own dimension so I can get back to work on the next chapter. You'll just have to wait until I get around to bringing the boys back on my own, just like everyone else. With a muttered string of curses, Bulma pressed the button on her gray box, forming another portal to Brenda's dimension. As Brenda stepped towards the swirling gray portal, Chi-Chi spat out a few last-minute rants and demands that the teenager bring her baby back right away. Goku cheerfully waved goodbye to the nice young woman, and Gohan rubbed his forehead to ease the headache he was getting. Bulma and Vegeta just glared at the back of the quickly disappearing author. The portal vanished, and all was as it had been before. Great, now what do we do? Gohan muttered. For one long moment, neither of the boys did anything, both waiting to see if the other would make the first move. Finally, Goku launched a punch at his brother, testing the older boy's reflexes. Raditz grinned as he easily caught the blow, completely unaffected by the power behind it. Seeing that his brother hadn't been bluffing about his strength, Goku decided to put more force behind his attacks. He threw several more punches and kicks, this time holding nothing back. Again, the teenager was able to block or dodge the attacks with a minimum of effort. A broad grin of pure excitement crossed the 7-year-old's features at the realization that he was up against an opponent capable of taking everything he had to give. The only other time that had happened had been when he was fighting Jackie Chun at the Tenkaichi Budokai, which, though it was only a few days ago, seemed like ages for him. From the brief interchange they'd had so far, Goku guessed that Raditz might be even stronger than Jackie Chun, a thought that sent a thrill of excitement down the child's back. Goku loved a good challenge. Raditz chuckled at the expression on his little brother's face, nimbly sidestepping a kick to his abdomen. He had yet to take the offensive in the spar yet, doing nothing but defending himself. You're pretty good, kid, he laughed lightly. Maybe even as good as I was when I was your age. But you're leaving yourself open here. He pushed aside Goku's fist and tagged the boy lightly on his chest. And here, his other hand reached out, tapped the side of Goku's neck, and here, his legs swept the child's feet out from under him, and Goku fell to his back with a whoof as the breath was knocked out of him. Giving his brother a lopsided smirk, Raditz took a step back and waited for the boy to get up. Sure enough, Goku leapt to his feet and crouched warily, eyeing his brother appraisingly. This time, however, there was a gleam of admiration in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The start of their spar, Raditz grinned at this, taking it to mean that he had won the respect of his little brother. It felt good to have someone look up to him for a change, rather than always being the weakest member of the group. Wow, you're really good, Goku congratulated the older boy, giving his trademark grin. Want to see something neat? Raditz smiled somewhat condescendingly and relaxed his stance a little. Sure, Kakarot. Goku, he replied easily, inwardly wincing at calling his little brother by his Earth name. What have you got? The boy's pretty good for his age, especially considering that he's been raised on this soft planet by weaklings like that turtle guy. He's definitely Bardock's son and my little brother, but I seriously doubt he has anything that could challenge me. I am, after all, 8 years older than him, and have a lot more experience in battle. It's something Master Roshi taught me, Goku said, puffing his chest slightly with pride. It's called a Kamehameha. He brought the heels of his hands together. The hands shifted to a position at his side, a faint blue light forming between them. Raditz watched with fascination as the blue light increased in size and intensity. As an afterthought, the teenager tried the trick of extending his ki senses to see just how powerful this ki blast was. Still unused to using this technique, it took him a moment to reach his faltering senses out far enough to detect his brother's forming attack. His eyes widened with surprise as the bolt of blue energy shot towards him faster than he expected. Caught by surprise, the beam slammed into his chest and knocked him back several feet until he lost his balance and fell backwards. As powerful as the blast was, though, it wasn't really all that strong compared to Raditz. After only a moment of laying in the dirt, he sat up dazedly and focused on the figure of his little brother. Goku was grinning broadly, holding 2 fingers up in a victory sign. Raditz rubbed his ribs. The soreness from his earlier spar compounded by a faint blistering where the Kamehameha had hit him. While he was relatively unharmed, the bandages that had previously bound his wounds had been burned off. Not that Raditz cared right then. I'm impressed, he praised the boy, grinning broadly. I wasn't expecting something that powerful from you, but... He trailed off, his grin changing to a smirk of superiority. In a flash, he was off the ground and had Zanzoken behind Goku, catching the boy in a headlock. I'm still stronger than you, Ototon, he chuckled into the boy's ear. Surprise, anger, and determination flickered sequentially across Goku's face, settling on that last emotion as he reached his hands up to tug at the arm that encircled his neck. It's no good, he's too strong. I can't escape. He started gasping when Raditz straightened up, thus making Goku dangle above the ground with only the headlock supporting him. Breathing became that much more difficult as Raditz tightened the pressure he was exerting on the boy's neck. He's trying to suffocate me until I lose consciousness, Goku noted with a hint of panic as stars began to swim before his eyes. Give up, Raditz demanded flatly. Grimacing with the effort of squeezing words past the iron bands that were Raditz's arms, Goku spat out a harsh, "No." He kicked his legs against the chest of his captor, and was rewarded when the 15-year-old jerked in pain. Guess I hit one of his bruises, Goku thought to himself. Noticing that the stranglehold had loosened somewhat, he tried once again to break free, wrapping his fingers firmly around his brother's wrist and yanking with all his might. Hope flickered inside him for just a moment when he managed to pull the constricting arm away for a brief second, allowing him to drag in a lungful of desperately needed oxygen. But his hope was dashed as quickly as it had formed when Raditz tightened a headlock once again. "There is nothing you can do, little brother, so why not give up? You can't win," Raditz stated, wrapping his tail around Goku's legs to prevent the child from kicking him again. "Won't give up," Goku grated out between clenched teeth. Dark spots were shifting in and out of his vision again, despite the air he had succeeded in gaining earlier. "Never." The next thing Goku knew, the pressure around his neck was gone, and he fell to the ground, gasping for air. Pushing himself up to his hands and knees, he coughed a few times and rubbed a hand across his sore throat. He turned his head to look at Raditz, confusion clearly written on his face. He was surprised to find that his brother had dropped completely out of his fighting stance, and was smiling genuinely, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I knew you had it in you," he said. "You're a true Saiyan, Goku, even if you won't admit it, and you're my little brother." The older Saiyajin reached a hand out, ruffled Goku's hair affectionately, the same way Bardock did, and he grinned. "You can go back and finish your breakfast now. I think I'll go take a shower and get this pink out of my hair and tail. I didn't get a chance to finish my meal either, but I am not going to risk eating in the same room as that chibi Anna." He shuddered slightly, then shoved the thought aside, standing up straight. Goku could only stare at his brother in awe for several long moments. It didn't matter that he had been beaten. Winning and losing had never meant much to him. Only the thrill of the fight and being able to test his own limits against his opponent. "My Oni-chan is so strong, and he even took my Kamehameha and hardly got a mark." Raditz's words finally registered in his mind, and he leapt to his feet, grinning broadly. "I'm starving, Ni-chan," he agreed, rubbing his belly sheepishly. "But that was really fun. I hope we can spar again soon." That said, he dashed back into the house, his mind on only one thing at the moment, finishing the meal that had been interrupted. Raditz smirked and chuckled to himself. "Yup, he's definitely Seijin," he said out loud, as he too headed for the door of the Kame house. Appetite and all. Within the house, Bulma and Vegeta were finding themselves at something of an impasse. Surprisingly enough, they discovered that they were running out of insults ready at hand to fling at each other. Roger, Krillin, and Yamcha had long since left the room as a method of preserving their sanity and their ears. Some of the things that those two had said to each other were enough to make even the legendary old pervert blush. Goten and Trunks, used to the fights Bulma and Vegeta had in the future, ignored them and continued to clear the table of the food. Lunch was still periodically placing on it. No one seemed to notice that Bardock had stopped eating and was still staring in shock at the two shrieking landmines. "Chibiana! Chibiana! Chibiana!" Vegeta chanted childishly, having already used his more intelligent insults at least once, if not twice, each. Now he was left with only the most basic of attacks, repetition of an insult known to aggravate the opponent. Chibiana! Bulma and Vegeta? Those two get together in the future? Long enough to have a kid? These same thoughts had been running around in his head ever since he had first realized who Trunks' parents were. He hadn't been paying much attention to what the two had been saying, besides noting the fact that he was glad Goku wasn't here to have his innocence destroyed. He would worry about Trunks and Goten themselves, but they seemed used to it. Bulma and Vegeta, those two looked like they'd rather tear each other's throat out than even say one civil word, let alone share a bed. "I am not a chibi!" Bulma screeched, clenching and unclenching her fists. Bardock blinked and managed to bring himself out of his daze, focusing once more on what was being said. Bulma's face had turned a lovely shade of red, from anger or embarrassment, he couldn't tell. "Vegeta, I swear, if you don't shut up, I'm going to rip off your Dragon Balls," Bardock yelped, eyes wide. He might not be the target of the girl's ire, but he had no desire to hear whatever graphic threats she had planned, nor did he want to expose the other two chibis present to that kind of violence. He had no clue if they were used to threats on the order of what he guessed Bulma had been about to use, and he didn't feel like finding out, Startled by his outburst, the prince and the scientist turned and looked at him questioningly. I was just thinking that we need to start looking for the Dragon Balls, so Goten and Trunks can get back home to their own time. A Dragon Ball hunt, huh? Bulma mused, her anger with the Saiyan prince already pushed to the back of her mind, all but forgotten. Well, if you're going on a Dragon Ball hunt, I'm going with you. Just as she said these words, Goku came running into the kitchen, looking a little worse for the wear, and launched himself at the food. A few steps behind him, Raditz stopped dead in his tracks, the shower completely forgotten. What? He shouted, an edge of panic shading his voice. Bulma's head snapped around when she heard Raditz and instantly started blushing. Well, it just makes sense for me to go with you guys. I've been on a Dragon Ball hunt before, and since I'm the one who made the Dragon Radar, you'd need me if anything were to happen to it. Besides, none of you know anything about Earth, except Goku, and he doesn't really count. A thoughtful look on his face. Bardock nodded in silent agreement with Bulma's reasoning. Hey, me and Trunks grew up on Earth, Goten protested, pausing in his eating. You mean you grew up on the Earth? Who knows how many years in the future? The blue-haired girl pointed out, folding her arms smugly. You might know what things are like on Earth in your time, but this is a different time than you're used to. Face it, you need me, and this way I can be with Raditz some more. Maybe I can figure out how to get his attention. I tried being obvious like they show on TV and in romance books, and that didn't work. Maybe I need to tone it down a bit, or maybe he's just shy. Thinking back to how Raditz had fled the house when she had offered to wash his hair, she decided it had to be the latter of the two. After all, one of her books had said somewhere that a woman could never be too forward when trying to get a man's attention. She suppressed a giggle. It's so cute that he's shy around women. Raditz looked like he was about to say something more against Bulma joining in the hunt, but Bardock spoke up first. She has a point, he said out loud to everyone, and no one in particular. None of us really know Earth well enough to be able to handle every situation that might come up. And if something were to go wrong with the radar, it would be useful to have her around. Nodding once sharply, he caught Bulma's eyes with his own. We would appreciate your company, he said gravely, ignoring the pleading looks on his oldest son's face. Sorry, Raditz, but if we do need her help, it would be better if she's actually there with us. A look of utter despair washed over Raditz's features, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Kami, why me?" he silently asked. "What did I do to deserve this? Now I'm going to be stuck with her for who knows how long. Why me?" Feeling that he needed some way to relieve a little of his stress, and since he still needed to remove the pink from his hair and fur, Raditz trudged off towards the bathroom to take what he hoped would be a relaxing hot shower. I just hope she doesn't try to spy on me, he thought pessimistically. The way she'd been acting around him, he wouldn't put it past her. Watching the retreating form of the boy she had developed feelings for, Bulma had a sudden gleeful thought. His bandages, they're gone. That means he'll need me to put new bandages on. She grinned broadly, not at all dismayed that her earlier work on dressing the teen's wounds had gone to waste. High above the ground, a large fortress floated, armed to the teeth with gun turrets, cannons, and bomb bays. A small helicopter zipped in towards this formidable monstrosity, unconcerned by the apparent danger it was in. In reality, there was no danger to the aircraft or its two occupants, for the owner of the flying fortress knew them and welcomed them with open arms. The helicopter swerved and dipped until it was level with an opening in the side of the fortress, then darted inside to make a gentle landing on the floor of the launch pad. The two blades on top of the vehicle continued to whir in ever slower circles even after the power was cut, creating a strong wind that threatened to knock over the short, blue man that was running impatiently towards the launch pad. Before the little goblin could reach the launch pad, though, two people exited the helicopter and made their way towards the creature that was approaching them. Pleased that he would not have to brave the winds that the chopper was making, the blue man, who looked more like a boy, stopped and waited for the two to reach him. When they were within 15 paces, the woman with black hair and the brown, fluffy-furred dogman simultaneously dropped to one knee and bowed their heads respectfully. "Well, did you get it?" the gremlin demanded rudely in an annoyingly high and nasal voice. The woman gave the creature a triumphant smile and reached into her gray trench coat with one hand. "Yes, sire, we did," she intoned proudly, pulling out a small orange ball about the size of a baseball. Within the ball there hung two little red stars that glinted slightly with reflected light. The blue goblin gave a delighted cry, running forward to snatch the treasured thing out of the woman's hands. Yes, yes! Nyaha-ha! The first step towards the reign of Emperor Pilaf, soon to be the ruler of the entire world. The creature known as Emperor Pilaf cackled with glee, dancing around like a sugar-crazed child for a full 10 seconds before he turned angrily on the dogman. "And what about you?" he snapped. "Did you get the thing?" Proud to have finally something to please his master, the dogman grinned and nodded happily. "Yes, sire, I did," he said in a mellow, almost stupid-sounding voice. He opened one paw and held out the Horyapoi capsule for inspection, which Pilaf greedily plucked up as soon as he saw it. Agent Mai and I even tested it to make sure it works properly. It was a huge success. "Excellent work, Xiao," Pilaf praised, smirking evilly. "With this thing, no one will be able to stop me from getting what's rightfully mine, not even that stupid monkey boy and his friends. I shall be ruler of the entire world." Stroking the capsule as lovingly as though it were a beloved pet, the self-proclaimed emperor threw his head back and began laughing maniacally, ensuring that anyone who heard him would be convinced that his sanity had long since leaked out from between his pointed blue ears. "Now go back out there and get me another Dragon Ball," he ordered imperiously. Once he finished his bout of evil laughter, "I've waited far too long to become emperor, and I refuse to wait any longer than necessary." "But sire, we haven't even eaten yet." Agent Xiao protested. "Do you want me to use my new toy on you, Agent Xiao?" Pilaf asked threateningly, giving the dogman his best glare. Both Xiao and Mai gulped audibly and shook their heads. "Then do as I say and get me those Dragon Balls." Both lackeys jumped up and bowed their compliance, anxious to escape the mad emperor's ire, and ran back to the helicopter before he tried to punish them for anything. Once breakfast was over, everyone gathered in the main room of the Turtle House to lay out plans for the Dragon Ball hunt. Much to his annoyance and Bulma's delight, Raditz once again had to put up with the blue-haired girl wrapping cloth bandages around his wounds. Though this time there was no need to clean the cuts and scrapes, courtesy of the fact that he had just finished taking a shower. He had been hoping to avoid the 11-year-old's ministrations and had even protested that since they were clean and none of them were that serious, he didn't need to have them bandaged. Unfortunately, Bardock had once again stepped in and insisted that his son allow Bulma to dress the wounds to keep them clean and prevent them from getting any sort of infection. "Damn, father! For showing his paternal instincts now, of all times," Raditz silently fumed, glowering at Bardock's back. "If he's so concerned for my health, why isn't he the one putting the bandages on? If he had been paying attention to exactly what Bulma was doing, he might have noticed that she was taking a little longer than last time to finish what she was doing." Bulma, for her part, was absolutely delighted to have a second opportunity, not only to touch Raditz but also to show him that she had knowledge of first aid and medicine. Not enough to make her a doctor or a nurse, but perhaps enough that she could impress her crush and get him to notice her. Rule number 39 of Ways to Attract Men clearly stated, show him that you have valuable skills. Since he was obviously a fighter, having a girlfriend who could tend your injuries if you got hurt in a fight was definitely a good thing. At the thought of actually being Raditz's girlfriend, Bulma's mind started to wander and her fingers lingered over a bandage she had just placed on a thin cut on the teenager's lower back. Her fingers brushed up against something furry during her daydreams and her mind snapped back to attention. She looked down to find that she was touching Raditz's brown tail, where it emerged from his spine. She watched in absolute fascination as the thing twitched back and forth in an agitated manner. Sure, she'd seen and touched Goku's tail more than once, but this was entirely different. Biting her lip nervously, she found that she was very tempted to stroke the wandering brown appendage. Before she realized what she was doing, she found that her hand had acted on its own and had curled gently around Raditz's tail. Lost in his own thoughts of vengeance against his father for forcing him to suffer the female's attentions once again, he didn't appear to notice that Bulma was holding his tail in her hand. That is, until she began to hesitantly stroke it with the tip of her finger. All at once his thoughts ripped away from Bardock and he gasped involuntarily and stiffened. Eyes widened to their fullest and every muscle in his body tensed and shuddered despite all his self-control. In contrast to the rest of his body, though, every hair on Raditz's tail fluffed out and the limb itself curled almost happily around her arm. Startled by such an extreme reaction to something as simple as petting his tail, Bulma hastily pulled her arm away, allowing the thing to drop. Not content with sitting still, the tail swished and curled in a lazy, content manner. Raditz, however, was not so pleased. Whipping his tail protectively around his waist, Raditz snarled angrily as he snapped his head around to face Bulma and gave her his harshest glare. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he growled, jerking away roughly to gain more space between himself and the blue-haired girl, his face flushed in embarrassment and mortification. Even Bulma's love-addled mind could not miss the fury his voice contained, nor could anyone else in the room. All conversation stopped as everyone turned their attention to the confrontation between the two. "What?" Bulma stammered, surprised by the venom of his words. "Never ever touch my tail again!" Raditz yelled, eyes flashing darkly. Standing up abruptly, he stormed out of the house, indifferent to whatever plans might be made during his absence. He only knew that if he stayed in that room 1 second longer, he'd probably snap. After Raditz vanished through the doorway, silence blanketed the room until Goten spoke up. "I don't understand. Why did Uncle Raditz get so mad when Bulma petted his tail?" He scratched the back of his head in confusion, looking up at Bardock in hopes of receiving an answer. "I always like it when Katzen pets my tail." Bardock squirmed uncomfortably, glancing at the non-Sangas in the room, then back at his grandson. Goten wasn't the only one with a puzzled look on his face, though. Trunks and Goku stared up at Bardock expectantly, along with the 5 humans present. Vegeta snorted quietly. He knew well enough what had happened. "Well," Bardock began uncertainly, unconsciously mimicking his grandson by rubbing the back of his neck. "It's really not something you'd understand until you're older. It's fine to pet a child's tail, but once they reach a certain age," he trailed off, uncertain how to continue the sensitive topic. "Kuso, I never had to explain this to Raditz. It's just one of those things that Sang children pick up on their own." Unsurprisingly, Master Roshi was the first to pick up on what Bardock was hinting at, despite the fact that he was human. He had heard about how sensitive Saiyajin tails are from Goku, and since his mind tended to make frequent visits to the gutter, he could guess what Raditz's reaction and Bardock's words actually signified. Being the old pervert that he is, it also didn't take him long to go from sensitive Saiyan tails to sensitive female Saiyan tails, and his nose promptly began to bleed. Noticing this, Bardock gave the venerable old man a dirty look, silently telling him to shut up and leave the explaining to him. Fortunately for him, Roshi was still very much distracted with hentai fantasies about Saiyan women and so did not bother trying to educate the clueless chibis. Taking a deep breath, Bardock said, "When you get older, your tail will get more sensitive, so you probably won't want to let anyone touch it, unless you really trust them." Without knowing how to continue without getting explicit and not wanting to damage their childhood innocence with the truth, he could only hope that would satisfy them for now. "Do you understand?" Thankfully, all 3 of the boys nodded their comprehension, taking Bardock's word for it with the blind faith that only children seem to possess. Bulma, however, was nowhere near as naive as the chibis, and had observed the reactions of the older males. Raditz's involuntary response, Rosie's bloody nose, and Bardock's discomfort with the subject added together in her mind, and it didn't take long for Bulma to figure out the real explanation for Raditz's behavior. An embarrassed flush spread across her cheeks as she realized exactly what she had done to Raditz. "I don't care what the books say. I never meant to be that forward," she moaned inwardly. "Great. Now I've embarrassed Raditz and made him react like that in front of his family. What if he hates me for it?" A perverted cackle from Mutant Roshi brought Bulma out of her self-reproach. "Whoa, boy, do I ever wish I had a tail now?" he mumbled to himself, loud enough that Bulma could hear perfectly well. With their Saiyajin hearing, so could everyone else, excluding Yamcha, Krillin, and Lunch. Bardock and Bulma both glared daggers at the martial arts master, while Trunks, Goten, and Goku simply looked clueless. Vegeta remained expressionless, not caring one way or the other. "Well, we all know where his mind is," Bulma muttered under her breath. Deciding that it was time to change the subject, she raised her voice. "We should be getting back to planning the Dragon Ball hunt." Just as desperate as Bulma to switch to a less embarrassing topic, Bardock gave the girl a grateful look, then said, "It would take too long to really stock up enough food to last us for very long. So I've decided that we'll spend the rest of the day hunting until we fill the empty capsules that we have. After that, we can hunt for food as we need it during the search for the Dragon Balls. We have 2 Dragon Radars now, the one Trunks brought with him and the one Goku has, so we could split up into 2 groups. However, I'd prefer it if we stick together as one group. It'd be easier to keep track of each other, and all our talents can be pooled together. Who all is coming with us? By us, he clearly meant the people with say and blood. Bulma was the only one to raise her hand. Lunch, Krillin, and Master Roshi explained that they had no real interest in searching for the lost Dragon Balls. Yamcha shrugged and said, "Well, I kinda left Por behind and she'll be mad at me if I just abandon her. You don't mind, do you?" Bulma, pleased that her best friend had thought to ask about her feelings, Bulma smiled and shook her head. Nodding to himself, Bardock turned his attention on the 11-year-old girl. That being the case, how do you intend to accompany us? We can all fly, except Goku, who's still learning, but he has Kintoten if necessary. If this were a short trip, I'd offer to carry you myself, but I'm guessing this trip will be well over a day in length. Oh, that's no problem, Bulma replied easily. I can always take an air car. Actually, I have a better idea, Trunks interrupted. Your air car is probably really slow, so maybe you should use one of mine. Being from the future definitely has its advantages, he thought. I can only imagine how slow we'd have to make ourselves go just to keep from losing Bulma. A flicker of annoyance crossed Bulma's face at the insult to something she had helped to create, but she brightened when she thought it over. Hey, that would be great. Think maybe I could take a peek inside? She asked, a wheedling tone to her voice. Absolutely not, Bardock refused, frowning with irritation. Trunks, letting Bulma get hold of any technology from the future could really mess up the timeline. I don't think that's such a good idea. At his words, the girl looked crestfallen, disappointed that she wouldn't be able to examine some of her inventions from the future. But Bardock-san, Trunks protested. So long as she doesn't actually look inside the car, what harm could it do? Besides, do you really want to travel as slowly as the air cars of this time go? He smirked faintly as he pulled out his trump card on this matter. Bardock only had to think about it for a moment before he sighed in resignation. Okay, Bulma, can use your air car, but only, he added sharply, before either one could celebrate, if Bulbo promises not to take it apart. Bulma sighed, but decided not to let it get her down too much. After all, at least she was still being allowed to go with them. Now that that's settled, Bardock continued, we should get started on gathering food. After several hours of all of the Saiyans fishing, the food capsules were filled and they were ready to go. Bulma allowed Yamcha to take her air car so he could get back to Polar, since she wouldn't be needing the thing for a while. They thanked Master Roshi for his hospitality and lunch for cooking, and set off. Bulma in her newly acquired, or rather borrowed air car and holding the radar she'd lent to Goku, while the other 6 hovered in the air. The idea was that Bulma would carry one dragon radar so that she could follow the Saiyans even if she couldn't see them, and vice versa. Goku had wanted to ride Kintoan from the start, but Bardock shook his head and said that he expected his son to practice flying as often as possible until it became second nature. Not only would it be a useful skill, but practicing controlling his ki in such a way would be good to develop some of his hidden strength. With a final wave to the island's inhabitants, the 7 members of the group took off, heading for the nearest blip on the dragon radar screens. Even Raditz, who was still angry about the earlier humiliation, couldn't help but admit that he felt a thrill of excitement as they started on their quest with new adventures and unknown perils around every corner. And so the Dragon Ball hunt began, gliding through the air at what was, for him, a leisurely pace. Bardock glanced down at the dragon radar in his hand to confirm that he was traveling in the right direction. Trunks had shown him how to operate the thing properly. Not that it was all that difficult, so it only took a swift look at the screen to be able to tell that they were getting close to the location of the first Dragon Ball. Tucking the device into the waistband of his pants, he closed his eyes briefly, enjoying the feel of the sun on his skin and the wind in his hair. With gentle breezes and mild temperatures, emerald green vegetation growing for as far as the eye could see, and only a bank of gray clouds on the horizon marring the sapphire blue sky, it was indeed a beautiful day on this strange planet known as Earth. So different from Vegeta-sei, and yet Bardock found himself growing increasingly fond of this alien world. Bardock opened his eyes again and focused on the 3 youngest children in the group. He was amused to find that they were currently engaged in a friendly game of tag, in which his son was losing. Badly. Poor Goku, he chuckled inwardly. He's still so new at flying, he doesn't even have a chance. In fact, it looks like Bulma had to slow her car down just to make sure he didn't get left behind. Bardock flipped over so he was flying with his back to the ground. crossing his arms thoughtfully. Maybe I should let Goku use that cloud of his now. He's only just learned how to fly. He's probably exhausted. As he swerved in towards Goten, Trunks, and Goku, he found that he had been correct in his assumption that Goku was tired. The 7-year-old was hardly able to stay in the air, and this time it wasn't from lack of concentration. Seeing his father, though, Goku's expression perked up a little, and he waved to Bardock, which brought a grin to the older Saiyan's face. I think you've been flying long enough that you've earned a break, Goku, Bardock said as he flew alongside his youngest son. If you want, you can call your cloud friend, or ride with Bulma. Your pick. Giving his dad a grateful look, Goku cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, Kinto-in. Within moments, the orangey-yellow puff zipped up, and underneath the boy, who settled into the fluffy magical cloud with a sigh of relief. It really was tiring work to fly non-stop for a solid hour or more. Goku turned and looked up at his father, flashing a brief victory sign, then raced back to where Goten and Trunks had continued the game of tag. Bardock grinned as he watched the child reinsert himself into the game with renewed vigor. Probably doesn't want to be defeated without a fight, Bardock mused, just like a Saiyan. Now that Goku was riding Kinto-in, the pace of their journey picked up, making the landscape below seem to rush by in a blur. The clouds on the horizon grew, but Bardock wasn't worried. Judging by what the radar showed, they would find the first ball well before they met the storm front. Since Trunks had brought a rather large capsule house, among the other things in his capsule case, shelter was also not a problem. The worst the storm would do was delay them a bit. Again, Bardock had no problem with that. The longer this hunt took, the more time he would have to spend with his grandson before the boy disappeared from his life forever. Bardock shook his head and mentally shied away from this line of thought. He didn't feel like being depressed, and there was no need to worry about the future until it actually arrived. Meanwhile, Goku, Goten, and Trunks had given up their game of tag and were now discussing hide and seek. The two Demi-Saiyans saw in Goku another playmate. Not the future father of Goten, and had determined that while they were in the past, they might as well enjoy it as much as possible. Goku was just the right age to enjoy the games they did, if only he knew some of the basic techniques. He was already working on flying, but there were two other key problems: ki sensing and ki suppression. While Goku might already have a basic sense of what ki was, he had no clue how to sense or hide it, two necessary things for a good game of hide and seek. Thus, it was up to the boys from the future to educate Goku in the principles of these techniques. They were confident that they could do a pretty good job of it too, since they had already had plenty of practice teaching Bardock, Vegeta, and Raditz. Figuring that enough time had passed since he had last looked at the radar, Bardock pulled out the green and silver object and clicked the button on the top until a small yellow blip appeared on the screen. A triumphant smile crossed his face as he realized just how close they were to their first target. Signaling the others to land, he started descending toward a clearing that should be able to handle the capsule car. Bulma flew in. Once there, he waited for everyone to land before he spoke up. Okay, the first ball is pretty close to here, he said, gesturing in the general direction in which the Dragon Ball lay. You can either come with me or wait here as you like. It's up to you. Not surprisingly, no one opted to stay behind. Vegeta and Raditz were curious to see what these balls looked like. Goten, Goku, and Trunks just plain didn't want to be left out of any of the fun. And Bulma flat out refused to be left behind. As the blue-haired girl capsulized the car, Bardock shook his head ruefully, wondering if this was going to set the precedent for the entire Dragon Ball hunt. As it turned out, finding the Dragon Ball was no problem. Getting to it, however, was another matter entirely. They walked through the forest until they came to the spot that the radar said the ball should be, and, looking around, found nothing except for a small hole set into the side of a low cliff. The hole was much too small for Bardock, Raditz, Bulma, or even Vegeta to crawl through, and looked to be a tight fit for even one of the three littler boys. Determined not to let a mere hole get in the way of obtaining one of the Dragon Balls, Goku got down on his hands and knees and poked his head inside the hole. "Hey! I think I see it!" he called out excitedly, his voice muffled by the dirt and rocks surrounding his head. Before anyone could protest, he wriggled his body further into the tunnel until only the tip of his furry brown tail could be seen. Pretty soon, even that disappeared from view, leaving only the scuffs and scrabbling sounds as the only proof of his continued existence. All of a sudden, he yelped in surprise. "Ah, there's something in here!" Bardock was about to blast the side of the lift to rubble to rescue his son from whatever trouble he might have gotten himself into. but stopped himself when he heard Goku give a delighted laugh. "It's just a badger," he said. "I bet this hole is its home. It's okay, little guy. I won't eat you. I just want that orange ball behind you." Bulma made a disgusted sound, knowing from experience that, under other circumstances, Goku might very well have been tempted to eat a badger. Apparently, from the angry sounds it made, the badger also thought Goku might be intent on making it his next meal. "Ow! Hey! Don't bite me! I'm not gonna hurt you! There! See? All I wanted was the Dragon Ball. You can go back to sleep now, 'cause I'm getting out of your home. Bye, Mr. Badger." A few moments later, a much dirtier Goku crawled backwards out of the badger hole, the fingers of one hand curled tightly around a small orange sphere. Bardock found it hard to suppress a grin as he took in the proud smile on his son's dirt-smudged face. Goku held up the Dragon Ball and whooped victoriously. "I got it! I got our first Dragon Ball!" The boy lowered his prize and took a look inside the sphere, counting the stars within. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey! It's the 4-star ball! It's Grandpa. If the Chibi Saiyan had been happy before, he was absolutely ecstatic now. "I can't believe it! I got my grandpa back." Clutching the Dragon Ball to his chest, Goku jumped up and down with glee, his tail joyfully swishing back and forth. "Wow, Goku, that's great," Bulma cheered, pleased to see her friend so happy. Bardock scratched the back of his head in confusion. "I seem to be missing something here." "What grandpa?" "My grandpa, Gohan," Goku clarified, grinning from ear to ear. "He's the one who found me and raised me. When he died, he left this ball behind. And sometimes he even talks to me, only he's not really talking. But I can tell what he's saying, so it doesn't matter." "Your grandpa, huh?" Bardock mused, glancing up at the sky. He was surprised to find that the storm front that he'd noticed earlier was now directly above them, blotting out the sun to the point that it was almost as dark as dusk. Part of the darkness might be due to the overcast clouds, but it was late enough in the day that it might also be due to the setting sun. Either way, it was time to set up camp. "I'd like to hear more about your grandpa, Goku, but it looks like we're about to be rained on. If Trunks would open up that capsule house of his, we can get you cleaned up, eat dinner, and you can tell me all about him, okay?" "Yeah," Goku quickly agreed. The thought of food and the opportunity to tell his father about his grandpa, combined with the euphoria of recovering the 4-star Dragon Ball, was enough to exhilarate the 7-year-old boy. Even the thought of having to take a bath again couldn't dampen his spirits in the slightest. Once Trunks popped the house out of its capsule, he practically dashed through the door just as the first fat drops of rain splattered in the dirt. The others were soon to follow, no one wanting to get soaked by the cold water that was now slashing down from the blackened sky in sheets. "And I looked at the full moon by accident when I went to pee, and the monster came." A wide-eyed Son Goku waved his arms dramatically, while Bardock listened attentively, and sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach as his son described the death of the man who had raised him. "I didn't actually see the monster, 'cause I was asleep, but when I woke up the whole house was smashed and Grandpa was dead. That monster squished my grandpa." Goku sounded angry at this thought, clenching his small hands into tight fists. "And that's why you shouldn't look at the full moon. Only there isn't a moon anymore for some reason. Maybe that means the monster can't come out anymore. I hope not, 'cause then he might squish someone else's grandpa." Having finished his story, Goku sipped from his steaming mug of cider. They had all eaten, and those who had needed it cleaned up in the bath that was installed in the capsule house. Now they were sitting in the living room, drinking hot cider and listening to Goku tell his father stories about Grandpa Gohan. An uncomfortable silence descended on the group, affecting mostly Bardock, Raditz, and Bulma. Goten and Trunks were oblivious to the meaning of the hints that Goku's story contained about the true cause of Grandpa Gohan's demise. One look at Bulma's ashen face told Bardock that she somehow knew exactly who the monster really was, perhaps from an encounter with Goku in his Uzaru transformation sometime since they'd met each other. Bardock and Raditz glanced at each other, a silent nod passing between them, and they agreed that now was not the time to tell Goku the truth. Unfortunately, Vegeta agreed to no such thing. "Don't you know anything about your Saiyajin heritage, you baka?" he growled derisively at Goku. When the boy only gave him a confused look, the young prince hissed between his teeth and pulled his tail out in front of him so Goku could see. "These things aren't just for decoration, you idiot Gaka," he continued, ignoring the sudden glare that Bardock was giving him. At the sight of the full moon, any Saiyan who has a tail will transform into a giant ape, or Uzaru, and will go on a wild rampage. Do you get it now? Leveling a finger at the stunned Chibi, Vegeta spoke the final damning words. You were the only Saiyan on this planet at the time. You were the so-called monster that killed your pathetic grandfather. He lowered his hand, folding his arms in self-satisfaction, and stared coldly at Goku, pitiless obsidian eyes boring holes into the boy's soft coal eyes. No. The word was a ragged whisper, accompanied by a fierce head shake of denial. No, he yelled, his own voice roaring in his ears. It's not true. You're lying. Goku turned his face to look at Bardock pleadingly. Tuzin, tell him he's lying. It wasn't me. It can't be me. I'd never kill Grandpa. Unable to bear the hopeful glimmer in his son's eyes, knowing that what Vegeta had said was the truth, Bardock looked guiltily down at the table, silently cursing Vegeta for opening his damn mouth. At the sound of a glass being knocked over and liquid splashing onto the floor, Bardock lifted his head to find that Goku had stumbled out of his chair, accidentally overturning his mug in the process, and was staring at everyone gathered in the room in expectation. The glass continued to roll until it reached the edge of the table, at which point it lazily fell off the table and crashed to the floor, shattering into a million sparkling razor-sharp pieces. A flicker of horrified realization dulled Goku's eyes, his face becoming slack, then screwed up in a look of intense denial. No, I didn't kill my grandpa, he screamed, tears spilling from the corners of his eyes faster than he could blink them away. His small frame shook with repressed emotion as he backed up slowly. Just as Bardock stood up, intending to go to his son and do something, anything, to comfort him, Goku gave a heartbroken sob and whipped around to face the door. In the blink of an eye, he had the door open and dashed through it, slamming it shut so hard that it broke off its hinges. Cursing furiously in every language he knew, Bardock ran after his son into the icy, pelting rainstorm, nearly tripping on the fallen door. Quickly adjusting to the dark gloom, his eyes darted about in every direction in hopes of catching a glimpse of his youngest son, but it was too dark and the rain was coming down too heavily to see more than a few yards in any direction. He had been too late in escaping the capsule house, and Goku had already vanished into the oppressive expanse of the storm-whipped forest. Picking a likely direction, he sprinted into the murky forest, desperately casting his senses to the howling winds in search of Goku's ki. He ran for several minutes in hopes of finding some sign of his son's passage, oblivious to the freezing rain that soaked his clothes and skin, chilling him to the bone. Come on, where are you? You can't have learned to hide your ki yet. No one's taught you. Unfortunately, either his son had learned to suppress his ki, or he was mortally wounded and close to death, or already dead because Bardock's search turned up fruitless. Sinking to his knees in helpless frustration, churned up mud seeping into his tattered black pants, the warrior pounded the soggy ground with his clenched fists. "Goku!" he screamed, mindless of the storm's fury as it beat down upon him. His entire body was racked with shuddering sobs, endless scenarios of everything that might have happened to his youngest child playing and replaying in his head. Throwing his head back, he gave a wordless cry of rage, anguish, grief, loss, every emotion within him. It was happening again. Another person he loved had been lost because he hadn't been there for them, had been too slow in coming to their aid, and too weak to do any good. Just as he had lost Soreri 7 years ago, he had lost his second son, whom he had found scarcely 2 days ago. Again, he had lost one he loved, and he had been unable to do anything about it. Brokenly sobbing the entire time, Goku stumbled through the forest, frequently slipping and sliding on rain-slicked vegetation. With his ki pushed down as far as it would go, he knew that no one, not his father, his brother, Goten, Trunks, or anyone, would be able to find him. He had learned this particular technique easily enough, surprising both of his teachers, but had yet to master the ability to sense other kits. None of this mattered to his grief-stricken mind. All he knew was that he had to get away from them, from his friends and family. Hot tears poured down his face to mix with the frigid rain that thoroughly drenched him, blinding his eyes to the dreary world around him. Thus, he didn't see the gnarled old root that lay in his path, didn't know it was there until his foot caught on it. As fast as he had been going, it was completely impossible for him to regain his balance, and he was sent sprawling face first into the muddy slope, rolling a few times before he came to rest at the base of a tree. Instead of picking himself up off the ground, the small child curled up into a miserable ball and lay on his side, his cheek resting in the cool mud and grass. Hugging his knees to his chest, he wrapped his tail tightly around his ankles and cried his heart out. Grandpa, he choked out, shivering violently from cold, shock, guilt, and the grief of reopened emotional wounds. Grandpa. So caught up in his own pain was he that he never even noticed the tree limb that came crashing down upon him from above, broken off of the tree it had grown from by the tearing winds of the storm.